the fire and the fury. The community of Maplewood Estates was known for its manicured lawns, pristine fences, and an HOA president who ran it like a kingdom, Karen Wallace. Every shrub was trimmed to regulation height, every mailbox painted the same shade of beige. And if you broke a rule, Karen made sure you felt it. David Reynolds, a 35-year-old civil worker, had bought his small house at the edge of the neighborhood 3 years earlier. He wasn't rich, but he loved that home. It had enough space for him and his aging mother, Margaret, whose health had declined after a stroke. When Margaret needed a wheelchair ramp, David built one himself. Sturdy, simple, and safe. To him, it was love. To Karen, it was violation number 47. This neighborhood has standards, Karen told him one afternoon, clipboard in hand. And compassion should be one of them, David replied calmly. The tension grew fast. Karen began sending formal warnings, demanding the ramp's removal, citing aesthetic disruption. David ignored the threats, refusing to bow to pettiness. Soon, the HOA fines arrived. Then came the late-night knocks, the complaints about his unkempt lawn, and the mysterious notes left in his mailbox. People who don't follow the rules shouldn't live here. Then one night, in late August, David woke to the smell of smoke. Within seconds, flames were crawling across the walls. He grabbed his mother, wrapped her in a blanket, and pushed her wheelchair out the back door through the thick smoke. The air burned his lungs, but he refused to stop until they were both safe on the street. The house went up like kindling, bright, roaring, merciless. By the time the firefighters arrived, there was nothing left but ash and the faint smell of gasoline. As David stood trembling beside his crying mother, Karen appeared on the sidewalk. Her voice carried that fake sympathy she'd perfected. "Oh, David, how awful. Such a shame about the fire. Maybe, when you rebuild, you can do it the right way this time." He said nothing, but his silence burned hotter than the flames ever could. The aftermath. The following weeks were a blur. Investigators declared the fire suspicious, but without evidence, no charges could be made. David's insurance barely covered half the loss. He rented a tiny apartment for himself and his mother, determined not to let despair win. But Karen wasn't done. She sent the HOA's attorney after him for unpaid fines. She even filed a complaint about the debris left on his burned property, calling it visual pollution. David stayed composed, but inside, the rage grew. Every night, he reviewed his emails and letters, organizing them into folders. Every threat, every fine notice, every petty demand, he saved them all. The neighbors whispered. Some sympathized. Others stayed silent. A few began to distance themselves from Karen, uneasy about how far she was going. Meanwhile, David rebuilt his routine. He took a temporary job at the county clerk's office, quietly working toward a law degree he'd once abandoned years ago. Each day reminded him that order, patience, and truth could still have power, even when the world felt unjust. One afternoon, he passed Karen in the grocery store. She looked at him with a smirk. "Still fighting the system, David?" she asked. "No," he replied softly. "Just learning how it works." She didn't know what that meant, but she would soon. The turning point. Months later, David secured a permanent position at the county courthouse as a legal assistant to Judge Marlene Porter, known for her integrity and compassion. For the first time since the fire, David felt stable. His mother's health improved, and the new job gave him a sense of purpose. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, everything changed. He overheard two officers in the hallway talking about a new case. A woman charged with embezzling HOA funds and insurance fraud connected to property damage. David paused mid-step when he heard the name, Karen Wallace. He froze. The woman who destroyed his home, the one who tormented him, was about to face the court where he worked. That night, David couldn't sleep. He stared at the flicker of a candle on his desk, wondering if this was fate or coincidence. He pulled out his folder, the one filled with HOA letters, Karen's threats, and his fire insurance reports. His conscience whispered two paths, revenge or justice. And though his heart screamed for revenge, his soul chose the latter. He brought the file to the district attorney's office and simply said, "This might help your case." He walked out without waiting for a thank you. The courtroom revelation. The courthouse buzzed with anticipation the day the case began. Karen entered wearing a bright red suit, confident, polished, the picture of control. But when she saw David standing beside the judge's bench, her smile faltered. "Mr. Reynolds," she said faintly under her breath. "Mrs. Wallace," he replied, not looking up. The trial unfolded like a slow storm. Prosecutors presented evidence of how Karen had redirected HOA maintenance funds into her personal account, falsified invoices, and even orchestrated an anonymous fire insurance claim after David's home burned, one that benefited her financially. Emails showed she'd bragged about teaching people lessons for breaking HOA rules. Her former assistant testified that Karen had kept a folder labeled "Troublemakers." David's name was the first in it. Each revelation hit like a wave. Karen's attorney tried to deflect, painting her as a misunderstood woman under stress. But the documents David had preserved were undeniable. Finally, Judge Porter turned to David. "Mr. Reynolds, you were personally affected by this case. Would you like to speak?" He rose slowly. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice did not. "When my house burned, I lost everything, except the truth. I could have hated her forever. But I learned that justice doesn't come from anger. It comes from patience. Karen didn't just burn my home. She burned the trust of an entire community. And now, she has to face what she built." The room fell silent. Karen lowered her gaze. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Justice and renewal. Months passed. The community of Maplewood Estates changed. Without Karen's grip, the HOA restructured, new leadership, fairer rules, and a stronger sense of unity. Karen was sentenced to prison time, and part of her seized assets went toward restitution. It wasn't enough to replace everything David had lost, but it was enough to start again. David rebuilt his home, not for pride, but for peace. The same ramp stood at the front, freshly painted, shining under the sun. Margaret, now healthier, sat by the window every morning, smiling at the sound of construction finishing. One evening, as the sky turned gold, a few neighbors gathered with candles. They helped repaint his mailbox, plant flowers, and place a small plaque at the edge of his yard that read, "Out of ashes, truth rises." David stood quietly on his porch, the wind brushing against his face. He wasn't bitter anymore. He was free. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "Some fires destroy, others reveal the light we didn't know we had." The story of HOA Karen spread through the town, not as gossip, but as a lesson. A reminder that no matter how powerful someone seems, truth and integrity always find their way back. And as David locked his door that night, peace filled his heart at last. Justice, though slow, had finally come home.